She rose from concubine to emperor. But was she a genius ruler or a merciless tyrant?
In the vast and unyielding history of imperial China, where power was carved almost exclusively by men, one woman rose beyond every boundary tradition tried to impose upon her. Her name was Wu Zetian. To some, she was a ruthless ruler who climbed to power through ambition and calculated strategy to others. She was a visionary leader who reshaped the Tang Dynasty and opened doors for generations of women who would never even know her name. But history is rarely simple. Tonight, we journey back to a world of silk robes, palace intrigue, whispered betrayals, and unbreakable determination to follow the life of the only woman who ever ruled China as emperor. The girl from the Wu family. Long before the name Wu Zetian echoed through the halls of imperial power, she was simply known as Wu Zhao, a young girl born into a family that stood quietly between privilege and uncertainty. She was born in the year 624, during the early years of the Tang Dynasty, a golden age that would later be remembered for its cultural brilliance, military strength, and flourishing trade along the Silk Road. But when Wu Zhao entered the world, that golden glow had not yet fully formed. The empire was still solidifying its control, and power shifted like sand beneath the feet of nobles and generals alike. Her father, Wu Shihua, was not born into aristocracy. He was a timber merchant who had risen through determination and keen business instincts. Over time, he formed alliances with powerful military leaders and eventually supported the Tang founding emperor, Li Yuan. Through loyalty and careful political navigation, Wu Shihua earned noble titles and a respectable position within the court's extended social structure. This meant that Wu Zhao grew up in a household where ambition was not only accepted, it was expected. Unlike many girls of her time, Wu Zhao's early environment exposed her to conversations about governance, military strategy, and economic affairs. Her father did not raise her in isolation from the world. He allowed scholars to teach within the household, and Wu Zhao listened closely as classical texts were read aloud. She developed an early fascination with language and literature. Stories spoke of emperors who ruled with wisdom, philosophers who shaped nations through ideas, and legendary figures who defied destiny itself. While other young girls were taught primarily domestic responsibilities, Wu Zhao absorbed knowledge like dry earth absorbing rain. Yet her childhood was not without instability. When Wu Zhao was still young, her father passed away. His death shifted the balance within the family dramatically. Without his protective influence, the household became vulnerable to internal rivalries and shifting loyalties among extended relatives. For Wu Zhao, this was one of the first moments she would learn a lesson that would shape her entire life. Power was never permanent, and survival required adaptability. Historical records and later legends describe her as a child with sharp intelligence and unusual confidence. There were whispers that she asked questions that made older scholars uncomfortable. She did not accept explanations simply because tradition demanded obedience. She wanted to understand why systems existed and how they could change. Her mother, Lady Yang, recognized this spark in her daughter. Instead of suppressing Wu Zhao's curiosity, she nurtured it quietly. Lady Yang ensured her daughter continued receiving education in poetry, history, calligraphy, and classical philosophy. These were skills that would typically be ornamental for women of the time, designed to make them appear refined rather than influential. But for Wu Zhao, they became tools of future survival. As she grew into adolescence, the political climate of the Tang Dynasty began stabilizing under Emperor Taizong. His reign was marked by strong governance, military expansion, and cultural flourishing. The imperial court became a place of opportunity, but also intense competition. Families with even the slightest connection to influence sought to place their daughters within the palace system. Becoming a concubine was dangerous, unpredictable, and often tragic. Many young women entered the palace never to be heard from again, their lives fading into anonymity behind layers of silk curtains and rigid hierarchies. Yet for families like the Wu clan, palace entry also represented a pathway to survival and advancement. When Wu Zhao reached her teenage years, her reputation for beauty and intelligence began circulating within elite social circles. She possessed striking features described in later chronicles as elegant yet commanding. But what truly distinguished her was her presence, a quiet intensity that suggested she was always observing, always calculating. Eventually, her name reached imperial officials responsible for selecting young women to serve within the palace of Emperor Taizong. The summons arrived like a distant thunderclap. For many girls, such an invitation would bring fear, confusion, or reluctant pride. For Wu Zhao, it marked the beginning of a transformation she may not yet fully understand, but perhaps had already begun preparing for in ways even she could not articulate. At approximately 14 years old, she entered the imperial palace as a low-ranking concubine. The palace was unlike anything she had ever known. Endless corridors stretched beneath painted ceilings depicting celestial dragons and heavenly guardians. Courtyards shimmered with lotus ponds and carefully sculpted gardens designed to symbolize harmony between heaven and earth. Every movement within these walls followed strict ritual. Every word carried potential political consequences. Hundreds of women lived within the palace, each assigned ranks that determined their clothing, servants, privileges, and daily routines. Rivalries were subtle but constant. A misplaced glance, a whispered rumor, or an accidental offense could destroy a woman's future entirely. Wu Zhao quickly understood that beauty alone offered no protection here. Emperor Taizong was known for valuing intelligence and strategic thinking. He surrounded himself with scholars, generals, and advisors who debated governance openly. Although concubines were expected to remain decorative and obedient, Wu Zhao's mind refused to remain passive. She observed everything. She listened to discussions between court officials. She memorized political alliances. She studied the emperor himself, his temperament, his interests, his moments of vulnerability and strength. Historical accounts suggest that she served in roles that allowed her proximity to imperial documents and internal communications. While her official rank remained modest, her intellectual awareness expanded rapidly. She began understanding how empires truly functioned, not through grand proclamations alone, but through networks of loyalty, fear, and calculated compromise. Still, her position remained fragile. In the hierarchy of concubines, rising in rank required favor from the emperor, but favor often came with intense scrutiny from rival factions. Wu Zhao's early years inside the palace were likely filled with long periods of silence and observation rather than dramatic advancement. And yet, this period would become one of the most crucial stages of her transformation. She was learning patience. She was learning timing. She was learning that power was not always seized through force. Sometimes it was gathered quietly, like threads slowly woven into an unbreakable tapestry. Then, as fate would shape her destiny in ways history could never fully predict, she encountered the young Prince Li Ji, Emperor Taizong's son. Their connection, subtle and carefully hidden, would one day ignite consequences that would shake the foundations of imperial tradition itself. But at this moment in her life, Wu Zhao was still just a young concubine walking the marble floors of a palace that did not yet recognize the storm quietly growing within her. The girl from the Wu family had entered the heart of imperial China. And though few could see it, history had already begun to shift around her footsteps. The Emperor's Shadow. Inside the vast imperial palace of Chang'an, life moved according to rules that had existed for centuries. Rules written not only in law but in ritual, hierarchy, and silent understanding. Every servant knew where to stand. Every official knew when to speak. Every concubine understood that her existence depended entirely on imperial attention that could disappear as quickly as morning mist. Wu Zhao entered this world as one of many young women chosen to serve Emperor Taizong. At first, she held only a minor rank. Her duties were modest. She assisted with ceremonial tasks, observed court etiquette, and remained largely invisible to the grand machinery of imperial politics. But invisibility, for Wu Zhao, was never weakness. It was opportunity. She moved quietly through palace corridors, her eyes absorbing details others ignored. She noticed which ministers lingered near the emperor longer than necessary. She noticed which servants carried messages between rival noble families. She listened carefully to tones of voice, to pauses between words, to glances exchanged during court gatherings. Wu Zhao began to understand something many would never grasp. Power did not live only in the emperor's throne. It lived in the fragile network of influence surrounding him. Emperor Taizong himself was unlike many rulers before him. He was a warrior, a strategist, and a scholar. His reign focused on strengthening the empire through administrative reform and military expansion. He valued competence, and he often consulted advisors with remarkable openness. Wu Zhao admired him. Historical accounts remain uncertain about the depth of their relationship, but it is widely believed she earned his attention through intelligence rather than simple beauty. She was known to respond to questions with thoughtful insight. She spoke carefully, never overstepping her rank, yet her words carried a precision that suggested she understood matters beyond her years. One story, passed through later historical records and folklore, tells of a moment when Emperor Taizong discussed the management of horses with his court. When others hesitated to speak, Wu Zhao allegedly offered a bold comment about discipline and control, suggesting that sometimes strength required firm authority. Whether the story is fully accurate or embellished by later historians, it reflects how she was perceived: observant, fearless in thought, and unafraid to analyze power. Despite occasional moments of imperial notice, Wu Zhao's rank did not rise significantly during Taizong's lifetime. The emperor had numerous concubines, and the palace hierarchy remained fiercely competitive. Yet this lack of promotion may have granted her something far more valuable: time. Time to study the palace system without attracting dangerous levels of jealousy. Time to observe imperial sons, princes who would one day fight for succession. Among those princes was Li Ji. Unlike his brothers, Li Ji possessed a temperament that contrasted sharply with the aggressive political maneuvering common among royal heirs. He was thoughtful, gentle, and often overshadowed by stronger personalities within the imperial family. Many at court viewed him as unlikely to hold ultimate power. But Wu Zhao did not dismiss him. Their interactions were subtle. Conversations took place under layers of palace formality, where every word required caution. Yet over time, an unspoken connection formed between them, one built on shared observation of palace life and mutual recognition of vulnerability within royal expectations. For Li Ji, Wu Zhao represented intelligence and emotional steadiness within a palace filled with hidden tensions. For Wu Zhao, Li Ji represented possibility, though perhaps not yet fully understood even by her own heart. Years passed beneath silk banners and ceremonial drums. Wu Zhao matured into a woman whose reputation quietly spread among palace circles. She became known not only for beauty and intellect, but for an almost unsettling calm. While others chased attention, she waited. While others reacted to palace gossip, she analyzed its source. Yet fate, as it often does in imperial history, arrived not through opportunity, but through loss. In the year 649, Emperor Taizong fell gravely ill. The palace atmosphere transformed overnight. Physicians rushed through corridors carrying scrolls of medicinal formulas. Officials whispered in hushed corners, calculating succession possibilities. Princes strengthened alliances while servants carefully avoided choosing visible loyalties too early. Wu Zhao observed everything with intense clarity. She had lived long enough within the palace to understand what the emperor's death would mean for women like her. According to long-standing imperial tradition, concubines who had not borne imperial children were often sent to Buddhist convents after an emperor's passing. This practice served both ritual and political purposes, removing potential sources of scandal or factional conflict within the next emperor's reign. It was a sentence that often meant permanent obscurity. When Emperor Taizong died, the palace entered a period of elaborate mourning rituals. Silk banners were replaced with somber colors. Music ceased. Court life slowed beneath layers of ceremonial grief. Prince Li Ji ascended the throne as Emperor Gaozong. For Wu Zhao, the transition marked both an ending and an uncertain beginning. Following tradition, she was sent to Ganya Temple to live as a Buddhist nun. The transformation from imperial concubine to religious recluse was abrupt and severe. Her ornate garments were replaced with simple robes. Palace luxury vanished, replaced by quiet stone halls and repetitive chants. The temple existed outside political power, yet it was not free from emotional conflict. Many women who entered such temples spent the rest of their lives in reflection, anonymity, and spiritual devotion. But Wu Zhao's mind remained restless. Inside the temple, she confronted a different form of isolation. The silence forced her to reflect on her journey. She replayed memories of palace life, analyzing every decision she had made, every relationship she had formed, every opportunity she had missed. More importantly, she considered her future. Wu Zhao understood that history rarely offered second chances, especially to women who had stepped beyond expected roles. Yet she also understood something deeper. Her story did not feel finished. Meanwhile, Emperor Gaozong struggled under the weight of imperial responsibility. The early years of his reign were overshadowed by internal court factions and his own fragile health. He faced immense pressure from senior ministers who questioned his authority. Within the palace, Empress Wang held official power, but rival concubines competed for influence behind embroidered curtains. Amid this fragile balance, Gaozong remembered Wu Zhao. Historical records suggest that during a visit to Ganya Temple, the emperor encountered her once again. Whether this meeting was arranged by destiny, lingering affection, or political calculation remains uncertain. But contemporary chronicles agree on one point. Their reunion reignited a powerful connection. Wu Zhao, now older, more experienced, and sharpened by reflection, no longer resembled the young concubine who had first entered Taizong's palace. She carried herself with composed confidence and intellectual depth that impressed Gaozong deeply. Soon after, he arranged for her return to the imperial palace. This decision shocked court society. Returning a former concubine of the previous emperor into the new emperor's inner circle violated deeply rooted Confucian traditions. Ministers expressed concern. Noble families whispered accusations. Even within the palace, Empress Wang and other concubines recognized the danger Wu Zhao represented. But Gaozong ignored resistance. Wu Zhao re-entered the palace not as a forgotten relic of Taizong's reign, but as a rising force within Gaozong's court. Her return marked a transformation that would slowly reshape imperial China itself. Inside palace chambers, alliances shifted like hidden currents beneath calm water. Wu Zhao began navigating the treacherous hierarchy with extraordinary precision. She built relationships with influential eunuchs. She gained loyalty from palace servants. She studied administrative systems, and observed weaknesses within rival factions. And above all, she strengthened her bond with Emperor Gaozong. Within a few years, she gave birth to imperial children, securing her political position further. Motherhood within the imperial family was not merely personal, it was strategic. Each child represented legitimacy, influence, and a direct connection to the dynasty's future. But with rising influence came intensifying hostility. Court rumors multiplied. Rival factions accused her of manipulation, ambition, and unnatural hunger for authority. Empress Wang, sensing her position weakening, attempted to counter Wu Zhao's growing power through alliances with other noble families. What followed would become one of the most controversial and mysterious episodes in Chinese imperial history. A tragedy involving Wu Zhao's infant daughter would soon ignite accusations that would destroy one empress and elevate Wu Zhao closer to a throne no woman had ever claimed before. Within the golden palace of Chang'an, beneath lanterns glowing softly against carved jade walls, the quiet concubine from the Wu family was evolving into something far more dangerous. She was learning that survival inside imperial power required more than intelligence. It required sacrifice. And soon, the palace would witness events that would forever divide historians between those who saw Wu Zetian as a brilliant strategist and those who believed she had crossed the darkest boundaries of ambition. The fall of an empress. When Wu Zhao returned to the imperial palace, she stepped into a battlefield hidden beneath silk and ceremony. From the outside, the palace of Chang'an shimmered with harmony and ritual perfection. Ministers bowed with calculated precision. Musicians played court melodies that echoed through marble halls. Lanterns glowed like captured stars along lacquered corridors. But behind embroidered screens and carved jade doors, alliances sharpened like unseen blades. At the center of this delicate structure stood Empress Wang. She was the official wife of Emperor Gaozong, a woman chosen through noble lineage and political alliance rather than romantic affection. Empress Wang possessed dignity, education, and an understanding of court tradition. Yet she carried one devastating vulnerability. She had not given the emperor a son. In imperial China, this was more than personal sorrow. It threatened dynastic stability. Without heirs, the empress's influence weakened, leaving her vulnerable to rival concubines who could secure succession through childbirth. When Wu Zhao returned to the palace and quickly gained the emperor's affection, Empress Wang felt the balance of her world begin to tilt. At first, she underestimated the returning concubine. Wu Zhao had no powerful noble family supporting her. She had spent years in religious seclusion. By all traditional standards, she should have posed little threat. But Wu Zhao possessed something far more dangerous than noble blood. She possessed patience shaped by survival. While Empress Wang relied on inherited authority, Wu Zhao built influence quietly and relentlessly. She gained loyalty from palace servants who carried messages across hidden corridors. She earned trust from eunuchs who controlled access to the emperor's private chambers. She studied court officials, identifying those dissatisfied with existing power structures. Most importantly, she deepened her emotional and intellectual connection with Emperor Gaozong. Gaozong was not a ruler who thrived in aggressive political conflict. He was sensitive, introspective, and often physically fragile. The pressures of governance weighed heavily upon him. Within this vulnerability, Wu Zhao became not only his favored consort, but his confidant. She listened to his concerns about rebellious ministers. She offered measured advice regarding administrative decisions. She spoke in ways that soothed his anxiety while subtly guiding his perception of palace politics. To Gaozong, Wu Zhao began to represent stability within chaos. And then, she gave birth to a daughter. The palace celebrated cautiously. Those sons were more valued as heirs. any imperial child strengthened Wu Zhao's standing. Servants carried gifts. Officials offered formal congratulations. Wu Zhao's chambers filled with silk wrappings and ceremonial blessings. But celebration lasted only briefly. One evening, as palace lanterns flickered gently in autumn wind, tragedy struck. Wu Zhao's infant daughter was found dead inside her cradle. Shock spread through the palace like wildfire through dry grass. Servants whispered in disbelief. Court physicians rushed to examine the child, though it was already too late. The emperor, devastated, demanded explanations. The death of an imperial child was never treated as accident alone. It carried political implications, emotional consequences, and supernatural interpretations. Wu Zhao reacted with visible grief. Historical records describe her as weeping openly before the emperor, her sorrow appearing genuine and overwhelming. Yet within hours, suspicion turned toward Empress Wang. According to official accusations recorded in later chronicles, Empress Wang had visited Wu Zhao's chambers shortly before the child's death. Some servants claimed to have seen her near the cradle. Others reported hearing arguments between palace factions. Evidence remained unclear, tangled within fear and palace loyalty. Wu Zhao presented her grief carefully, never directly accusing the empress with open rage. Instead, she allowed sorrow to speak for her. She described her loss with heartbreaking restraint. She expressed confusion, vulnerability, and maternal devastation. Her composure had profound psychological impact on Emperor Gaozong. The emperor's emotions, already fragile, spiraled toward suspicion and fury. Losing a child wounded him deeply, and Wu Zhao's grief intensified his protective instincts toward her. Court officials loyal to Wu Zhao began quietly reinforcing rumors of Empress Wang's jealousy and desperation. Empress Wang attempted to defend herself. She denied involvement. She appealed to tradition, reminding ministers of her noble birth and long-standing loyalty to the dynasty. She sought alliances with rival concubines, including Consort Xiao, hoping shared fear of Wu Zhao's rise would unite opposition. But the palace had begun shifting beneath her feet. Wu Zhao moved with astonishing strategic precision. She gathered testimonies from servants. She highlighted inconsistencies in Empress Wang's defense. She portrayed herself as a vulnerable mother victimized by palace envy rather than an ambitious rival seeking power. Historians remain divided about the truth behind the infant princess's death. Some later scholars suggested Wu Zhao may have orchestrated the tragedy herself to frame Empress Wang, a theory impossible to prove but repeated throughout centuries of historical debate. What remains certain is this: the event changed everything. Emperor Gaozong ordered a full investigation. Ministers loyal to the empress attempted to slow proceedings, but Gaozong's emotional determination overwhelmed political resistance. Accusations multiplied. Rumors hardened into formal charges. Soon, evidence, whether authentic or constructed, declared Empress Wang guilty of conspiracy and murder. The consequences were brutal. In imperial China, removing an empress was rare and scandalous. Yet Gaozong issued the decree without hesitation. Empress Wang was stripped of her title, imprisoned, and later executed under circumstances described in some chronicles as exceptionally cruel. Consort Xiao, accused of alliance with Wang, suffered similar fate. The palace watched in stunned silence as centuries of Confucian hierarchy fractured before their eyes. Noble families whispered in horror. Ministers questioned whether moral order itself was collapsing. And in the center of this storm, Wu Zhao rose. In the year 655, she was formally crowned Empress Wu. The ceremony unfolded beneath towering palace gates adorned with gold dragons and ceremonial banners. Officials knelt. Court musicians performed ancient hymns honoring imperial continuity. Ritual masters recited blessings linking heaven, earth, and throne. Wu Zhao, once a concubine of uncertain standing, now stood beside the emperor as the most powerful woman in the empire. Yet her transformation was not merely symbolic. Unlike many imperial consorts before her, Empress Wu refused to remain ornamental. She studied state documents. She attended administrative discussions. She offered opinions during imperial councils, an action that shocked traditional officials but gradually became accepted due to Gaozong's increasing reliance on her judgment. The emperor's health deteriorated during these years, further strengthening her influence. Chronic illnesses weakened his ability to govern consistently. During periods of incapacitation, Empress Wu began reviewing memorials submitted by provincial governors and ministers. She issued recommendations. She questioned policies. She reshaped administrative priorities. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the empire began listening to her voice as if it carried imperial authority itself. But power always breeds resistance. Confucian scholars condemned her rising influence as violation of cosmic order. Traditional philosophy insisted that women should support, not dominate, governance. Memorials flooded the court warning that allowing a woman to interfere in state affairs would invite heavenly punishment. Wu Zhao responded with intellectual ferocity. She promoted officials based on merit rather than noble lineage, weakening aristocratic monopolies that had dominated Tang politics for generations. She expanded examination systems, allowing talented scholars from lower backgrounds to enter government service. These reforms earned loyalty from emerging bureaucratic classes while angering entrenched noble families. She also strengthened internal intelligence networks, ensuring she received early warnings about conspiracies forming against her authority. Meanwhile, Gaozong increasingly withdrew from direct governance, relying on Empress Wu not only for advice, but for leadership itself. Together, they ruled as a partnership that defied centuries of gender tradition. Yet whispers persisted. Some ministers feared her brilliance. Others feared her ruthlessness. Stories circulated describing her as manipulative, calculating, and willing to sacrifice anything for control. But among common citizens and rising officials, she gained reputation as a ruler who valued competence and administrative order. Within palace chambers, Wu Zhao stood at a threshold history had never crossed. She had destroyed an empress. She had claimed the highest female position within imperial China. And now, with an emperor whose strength slowly faded beside her, she stood closer to ultimate power than any woman before her. Still, her ambition had not yet reached its final form. For Empress Wu did not merely wish to stand beside the throne. She had begun imagining a world in which she might sit upon it alone. Beyond palace walls, the Tang Empire continued expanding, its armies securing trade routes and strengthening frontier defenses. The dynasty appeared prosperous, stable, and radiant beneath ceremonial grandeur. But deep within Chang'an's imperial heart, a transformation was unfolding, one that would soon challenge not only political tradition, but the very concept of rulership itself. And as Emperor Gaozong's health declined further, ministers, generals, and scholars across the empire began asking a question whispered only in private shadows. If the emperor could no longer rule, who truly held the mandate of heaven? The throne behind the curtain. By the late years of Emperor Gaozong's reign, the palace of Chang'an had begun to change in ways both subtle and profound. Rituals continued as they always had. Court assemblies opened with formal greetings. Officials knelt in orderly rows beneath painted ceilings filled with celestial dragons and heavenly constellations. From the outside, the Tang Empire appeared unshakably stable. But inside the imperial chambers, power was quietly rearranging itself. Emperor Gaozong's health had steadily declined. Chronic illness weakened his body, leaving him exhausted after long court sessions. Severe headaches, failing eyesight, and persistent fatigue forced him to withdraw from administrative responsibilities more frequently. In those moments, Empress Wu stepped forward. At first, her involvement appeared temporary, merely assisting the emperor by reviewing state memorials and summarizing government reports. Ministers, accustomed to imperial spouses offering gentle counsel, tolerated her growing presence. Yet they soon realized something unsettling. Empress Wu was not summarizing documents. She was analyzing them. She studied taxation policies with remarkable precision. She questioned military deployments across border territories. She examined agricultural reforms and provincial corruption cases with an attention to detail that rivaled veteran ministers. And when she spoke, Emperor Gaozong listened. Increasingly, decisions announced by the emperor carried unmistakable echoes of her reasoning. Soon, court officials began delivering memorials directly to Empress Wu before presenting them to the throne. Eunuchs carefully arranged meetings between her and administrative advisors. Palace scribes recorded her suggestions as official policy guidance. Though Gaozong still sat upon the throne, Empress Wu had begun ruling from behind it. This arrangement became known among court historians as governance behind the curtain. During major court sessions, Empress Wu sometimes sat concealed behind a silk screen placed beside the emperor's throne. From behind the embroidered barrier, she could hear discussions, observe ministers, and whisper guidance to Gaozong when decisions required clarity. For conservative Confucian scholars, this was deeply disturbing. Ancient tradition emphasized strict separation between male governance and female domestic roles. The image of an empress influencing imperial decisions from hidden chambers felt dangerously symbolic. It suggested a reversal of cosmic order, where yin overshadowed yang, where established hierarchy dissolved into uncertainty. Memorials condemning her influence began arriving from across the empire. Officials warned that natural disasters, crop failures, and military unrest might follow if the sacred balance between gender and governance collapsed. Some ministers pleaded directly with Gaozong to limit his wife's involvement in state affairs. But the emperor refused. To Gaozong, Empress Wu represented clarity in moments when his mind struggled under illness. Her administrative insight stabilized his reign. Her confidence restored his authority when physical weakness threatened imperial dignity. And Wu Zhao understood this dependence perfectly. Rather than confronting opposition openly, she began reshaping the government structure itself. One of her most significant reforms involved the imperial examination system. For generations, aristocratic families had dominated government positions through hereditary privilege. Empress Wu expanded examination opportunities, allowing talented scholars from modest backgrounds to enter official service. This policy carried enormous consequences. Young intellectuals across the empire began studying with renewed hope, knowing their social status would no longer block advancement. Provincial teachers promoted loyalty toward Empress Wu, portraying her as a ruler who valued merit rather than birthright. Meanwhile, noble families watched their traditional authority erode. Wu Zhao also reorganized intelligence networks inside the palace and provincial administrations. She strengthened investigative bureaus tasked with monitoring corruption, conspiracy, and political dissent. Informants operated quietly within bureaucratic offices, reporting suspicious behavior directly to the empress. These networks earned her reputation as both visionary reformer and feared strategist. Many ministers admired her efficiency. Others feared that a single careless word might reach her ears through unseen channels. Beyond administration, Wu Zhao understood the importance of ideology. She recognized that political legitimacy in imperial China depended not only on power, but on spiritual authority. The mandate of heaven, the belief that divine forces granted emperors their right to rule, shaped public perception of leadership. Confucian traditions strongly resisted female sovereignty. To overcome this barrier, Wu Zhao turned toward Buddhism, a religious philosophy more flexible regarding gender and cosmic authority. She sponsored Buddhist temples throughout the empire. She commissioned monks to produce scriptures suggesting that female rulers could embody sacred wisdom and bring spiritual renewal to the world. Some texts even prophesied the rise of a female sovereign who would restore harmony to the land. These writings spread gradually among scholars, merchants, and provincial populations. Through religion, Wu Zhao began reshaping how the empire imagined legitimate authority. While ideological transformation unfolded, family dynamics within the palace grew increasingly complex. Wu Zhao had given birth to several sons, strengthening her dynastic position. Yet imperial succession remained delicate. As Gaozong's health worsened, questions regarding future emperors grew urgent. Court factions formed around different princes, each supported by ministers hoping to secure influence over future governance. Some princes appeared independent and strong-willed, qualities admired in traditional male heirs, but potentially threatening to Wu Zhao's long-term authority. Historical accounts suggest that Wu Zhao maneuvered carefully to eliminate rivals among her own children. Princes who resisted her influence were gradually removed from succession, sometimes through demotion, exile, or suspicious accusations of disloyalty. These actions revealed a chilling truth about her ambition. Wu Zhao was not merely securing power for herself. She was redesigning the entire structure of imperial succession. During these years, Emperor Gaozong's ability to govern continued declining. He increasingly withdrew from public ceremonies, leaving Empress Wu to oversee audiences with ministers and foreign envoys. Diplomatic envoys from Korea, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia often found themselves negotiating indirectly with her authority. Foreign observers noted her intelligence and commanding presence. Some described her as calm, articulate, and capable of shifting between gentle diplomacy and decisive command. Inside Chang'an, however, opposition intensified. Traditionalist officials secretly plotted to remove her influence. They feared that allowing an empress to dominate governance would shatter centuries of imperial stability. Several conspiracies emerged, though most were discovered early through Wu Zhao's intelligence network. Punishments were swift and severe. Officials accused of treason faced exile or execution. Entire families sometimes lost political standing overnight. These actions reinforced her reputation as ruthless, but ensured that open resistance gradually diminished. By the final years of Gaozong's life, the transformation of imperial authority was unmistakable. Though he remained emperor in title, Empress Wu controlled daily governance. She reviewed taxation policies, directed military campaigns, supervised infrastructure development, and shaped diplomatic strategy. She no longer ruled behind the curtain. She ruled the empire itself. Yet history had not reached its most dramatic turning point. In the year 683, Emperor Gaozong died. The empire entered official mourning. Bells echoed across temple courtyards. Ministers wore white, ceremonial robes. Citizens lit incense along crowded streets, honoring the passing of their emperor. According to tradition, power should have transferred fully to his chosen heir. But tradition no longer controlled the Tang court. Wu Zhao assumed the role of Empress Dowager, the mother of the new emperor. From this position, she maintained complete authority over governance while her son occupied the throne as ceremonial ruler. At first, the arrangement appeared temporary. The young emperor attempted to assert independence, appointing advisors outside his mother's influence. But Wu Zhao acted decisively. Within months, she forced him to abdicate. Another son replaced him, chosen for greater obedience and political reliability. The court watched with growing realization that maternal authority had surpassed imperial sovereignty. Empress Dowager Wu now commanded the empire through successive puppet emperors, ensuring continuity of her rule while preserving the illusion of dynastic tradition. Yet the illusion could not last forever. As years passed, Wu Zhao grew older, but her ambition sharpened rather than softened. She expanded religious propaganda, supporting female rulership. She strengthened loyal bureaucratic networks across provinces. She eliminated remaining aristocratic factions resisting her authority. Whispers spread throughout Chang'an and distant provincial capitals alike. Some called her a savior who broke the chains of hereditary privilege. Others called her a tyrant who destroyed sacred order for personal glory. But one truth became undeniable. Wu Zhao stood closer to ultimate power than any woman in Chinese history. And within the quiet chambers of the imperial palace, she began contemplating the final step, one that would shock the empire, rewrite dynastic lineage, and challenge the ancient belief that heaven could never grant absolute authority to a woman. She was no longer content guiding emperors. She was preparing to become one. Soon, she would take a step that would echo across centuries, a step that would transform Wu Zhao into the only woman ever to sit upon the dragon throne as emperor in her own name. And when that moment arrived, the Tang Dynasty itself would tremble beneath the weight of her decision. The woman who became emperor. The imperial city of Chang'an had witnessed countless coronations, dynastic victories, and political upheavals across centuries. Golden roofs shimmered beneath the rising sun. Processions of ministers in embroidered robes walked through palace gates carrying scrolls, seals, and ceremonial banners. Yet in the year 690, the palace prepared for a moment unlike any before it. For the first time in Chinese history, the empire stood on the edge of witnessing a woman claim the dragon throne in her own name. By this time, Wu Zhao, now known throughout the empire as Empress Dowager Wu, had ruled behind successive puppet emperors for nearly a decade. Her authority stretched across administrative offices, military commands, religious institutions, and intelligence networks. Few policies were enacted without her approval. Few officials dared oppose her openly. Still, legitimacy remained incomplete. According to tradition, she governed through the authority of her sons. Confucian doctrine insisted that heaven entrusted sovereignty only to male rulers. Though Wu Zhao held absolute power in practice, she remained, officially, a caretaker of imperial continuity. But Wu Zhao had never been satisfied with symbols alone. Years of preparation had shaped the final stage of her ambition. Buddhist monks under her patronage circulated prophetic texts predicting the rise of a sacred female monarch destined to restore cosmic balance. Temples displayed statues depicting divine feminine wisdom guiding earthly rulers. Scholars loyal to her court published interpretations of ancient scriptures suggesting heaven's mandate could transcend gender. Gradually, public imagination began adjusting to an idea once considered impossible. Meanwhile, inside the palace, Wu Zhao eliminated remaining obstacles with surgical precision. Loyal ministers replaced aristocratic officials resistant to her rule. Intelligence networks uncovered conspiracies before they could form. Provincial governors aligned themselves with her authority, understanding that her command reached every corner of the empire. By the late 680s, resistance had faded into cautious acceptance. Then, in 690, Wu Zhao made her decision. She summoned court officials, generals, religious leaders, and provincial envoys to Chang'an for an announcement that would shatter centuries of political tradition. Rumors swept through the capital like thunder before a storm. Markets buzzed with speculation. Scholars gathered in tea houses debating whether heaven itself might punish such audacity. On the appointed day, the grand palace courtyard filled with ceremonial splendor. Crimson banners bearing imperial dragons waved in autumn wind. Bronze incense burners released spirals of perfumed smoke drifting toward the heavens. Court musicians performed ancient melodies reserved only for the highest imperial rites. Wu Zhao entered the ceremonial hall wearing robes embroidered with symbols reserved exclusively for emperors. Gasps rippled through assembled officials. She did not sit beside the throne. She ascended it. Before thousands of witnesses, Wu Zhao proclaimed the founding of a new dynasty, the Zhou Dynasty, often called the Wu Zhou, named after ancient Zhou kings who symbolized moral renewal in Chinese historical mythology. By choosing this name, she framed her reign not as rebellion but as restoration of ancient virtue. She declared herself Emperor Wu Zetian. Not empress. Not regent. Emperor. The title alone shook the ideological foundations of Chinese civilization. Every court ritual, administrative document, and diplomatic record had to be rewritten to reflect her unprecedented status. Some officials knelt willingly, recognizing the unstoppable reality of her power. Others trembled, forced by political necessity to bow before a ruler who defied every principle they had studied since childhood. Outside the palace, reactions varied across the empire. Among aristocratic families, outrage simmered. They viewed her rule as blasphemy against Confucian order. Among common citizens and newly elevated officials, however, her reign carried promise. She had expanded examination opportunities, weakened hereditary privilege, and promoted individuals based on talent rather than birth. For many, she represented radical social transformation. As emperor, Wu Zetian governed with remarkable energy despite her advancing age. She strengthened agricultural reforms, improving irrigation systems and grain distribution to stabilize rural economies. She supported educational institutions, encouraging scholarly advancement across provinces. She reinforced border defenses and maintained diplomatic relationships with neighboring states, preserving Tang-era international influence. Her administration expanded bureaucratic efficiency through meticulous record-keeping and performance evaluations for government officials. Corruption investigations intensified under her rule, ensuring local administrators remained accountable to central authority. Yet her reign also carried undeniable severity. Opposition, even when subtle, faced swift punishment. Historical accounts describe purges against ministers suspected of disloyalty. Surveillance networks monitored court officials and provincial governors alike. Critics portrayed her as ruthless, claiming she sacrificed human lives to preserve her power. Supporters, however, argued that such measures protected imperial stability during an era of political transition. They viewed her firmness as necessary to defend reforms against entrenched aristocratic resistance. Beyond policy and power, Wu Zetian continued shaping religious and philosophical narratives supporting her legitimacy. She commissioned massive Buddhist monuments, including the famous Longmen Grotto sculptures, which depicted divine figures associated with female spiritual authority. Through art and architecture, she embedded her reign within cosmic symbolism. Years passed, and Wu Zetian ruled with commanding authority unmatched by any woman in global history at the time. But time itself remains the only force that no emperor can conquer. By the early 700s, Wu Zetian's health began to decline. Age weakened her once tireless energy. Palace factions, long suppressed by her intelligence networks, slowly re-emerged. Ministers debated succession quietly, aware that her unprecedented dynasty lacked deep historical roots. In 705, court officials and military leaders orchestrated a final political shift. Facing pressure from loyalists concerned about imperial continuity, Wu Zetian abdicated the throne. Power returned to the Tang royal lineage through her son, Emperor Zhongzong. The Wu Dynasty ended as abruptly as it had begun. Wu Zetian retreated from public life within the palace where her journey had started decades earlier as a young concubine. The corridors she once navigated with strategic precision now echoed with distant memories. The throne she had claimed through relentless ambition passed once again into male hands. Later that same year, she died at the age of 81. Her burial carried imperial honors, recognizing both her controversial rule and her undeniable impact on Chinese history. Yet her legacy would remain fiercely debated for centuries. Confucian historians often condemned her as tyrannical, immoral, and dangerously ambitious. They portrayed her as a warning against female political authority, emphasizing alleged brutality and manipulation. Other scholars, particularly in modern interpretations, present a more complex portrait. They recognize her administrative brilliance, social reforms, and ability to govern one of the world's largest empires during an era dominated by patriarchal ideology. Wu Zetian shattered a barrier history had never crossed. She proved that intelligence, strategy, and political will could transcend social expectations carved into centuries of tradition. But her story also reveals the cost of absolute ambition. She rose through brilliance, resilience, and ruthless calculation. She transformed herself from powerless concubine into sovereign ruler of an empire stretching across mountains, deserts, and oceans of culture. Yet her ascent required sacrifices, family, allies, and perhaps even personal peace, all offered upon the altar of power. Today, historians continue debating whether she should be remembered as visionary reformer or merciless tyrant. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between. For Wu Zetian did not simply change Chinese history. She forced it to confront the possibility that destiny itself could be rewritten by those bold enough to defy its boundaries. And long after her dynasty faded into memory, the echo of her reign still whispers through the corridors of time, a reminder that history is not shaped only by those who inherit power, but by those who dare to seize it. And so, the story of Wu Zetian comes to an end. From a young girl entering the palace with no power of her own, she rose to become the only woman in Chinese history to rule as emperor. Her journey was shaped by intelligence, ambition, and choices that changed the course of an empire. History continues to debate who she truly was, a visionary ruler or a relentless strategist. But one truth remains certain. Her name was carved into time in a way that could never be erased. Thank you for listening to this story. And whenever you return to the past, there will always be another legend waiting to be heard.